Talk about animal biotechnology, you know, it's a little unfair for me to follow Ron, because I think Ron has one of the stories that really is telling us how we're going to look at animal biotechnology, and a great technology. And he's the chair of my animal policy committee at Bio, so I'm sure he'll tell me later what I said wrong in this presentation. As we think about precautionary principle, and we think about precaution in general, my take on it is from the animal biotechnology realm. You know, as the director for animal biotechnology at Bio, I get to see a lot of companies come in and have these great innovations and things that I think are really neat. And as a scientist, I'm all excited about. But I think part of our job is convincing others that you know, these things are beneficial, and that these things can be utilized in the public realm after being checked for safety, of course, and have that opportunity to help us out as we feed the world. I was going to show a picture of where I grew up, and I grew up in central Iowa, just outside of Ames, and this is about as close as I could get on Google Maps. You can see down the gravel road there. I guess the Google mapper didn't quite get all the way down the road to my house, but you know, we did grow up in central Iowa, and so it always was a part of us growing up, animal agriculture in general, really. We raised some animals growing up. We were in 4-H growing up, and we had that opportunity to really think about how we make things better, how we improve animals, how do we keep them healthy, how do we provide food for people. Most of the roads in central Iowa are labeled with letters and numbers, and that has kind of helped us with the 911 system. This has been done for a few years. In my travels out to Washington, D.C., where I now live and work, you know, I also see letters and numbers on the roads, and I find that kind of interesting. It feels a little bit like home. But at the same time, I don't necessarily see everyone thinking about agriculture as just a part of who they are or part of what they do. And I think that's where we have to see, and we have to be vocal, and we have to talk about what we do and why we do it. I've come to that realization, and I know many of you have come to that realization, but I think there's a lot of folks out there that don't have that idea of where things come from and how we can make them better, or how we can impact future generations. And so, you know, I started out in Iowa, and I started at Iowa State, and I worked in animal science, and I went to Michigan State and did animal science, and I went to University of Kentucky and worked on the research staff there in animal science as well. And I took a year at University of Kentucky, and I switched over to human health work, and I worked on lung cancer research. And in lung cancer research, the things they look at and the things they care about seem to be very different than what we do in animal science, but we're all using the same techniques, we're all using the same technologies. Sometimes I'd say that in the animal agriculture world we actually do better at the experiments because we don't have humans that we're trying to do surveys on there that tell us half-truths when they're trying to find out information. But there's really a lot of misinformation, a lot of knowledge that's being lost there. And so I want to go through and talk a little bit today about, you know, the need for technology in animal agriculture and some of the regulatory challenges. And I think Ron did a nice job of outlining a lot of these. But also a little bit of information about who are the opponents to biotechnology and maybe why they're opponents to biotechnology. I think the title of my talk talks about inaction. And so we'll talk some about that, and then also what people such as myself at Bio are doing about that inaction. I think all of you know these challenges that we're trying to address with animal agriculture. I don't have to go into them in a lot of depth, but obviously food security is something that not all of us work at every day. I went out to lunch today. It was a huge menu, and there were lots of things available. But there's people around the world that don't have those opportunities, and we'll see in the future how those opportunities play out. Obviously, animal health is quite important to what we do and how we raise our animals and keep them producing well. And then the animal welfare aspects. You know, we think about animal welfare, and sometimes when we say animal welfare, people think about animal rights, but really animal welfare is the care of our animals. I know we all care for our animals, and we think about these things, but there are opportunities for those to be even better. And then the environmental footprint. Agriculture is disruptive to the environment. It's just the way it is, and it's how we produce food. And if we can have less disruption to the environment, that's what we try to do. And I think there's some tools of biotechnology that can help us that. We talked about bio a little bit, but bio is the Biotechnology Industry Organization. And our motto is that we're working to heal, fuel, and feed the world. And really, it's our members that are doing this. We have over 1,100 members, and it's everybody from large pharma companies to small researchers and 3 or 4 people working out of almost their basement to work on biotechnology in a lot of different related areas. They're using the same technologies, but they're using them in different places. Some are doing R&D in human health. Some are doing R&D in industrial and environmental, which we include advanced biofuels, bioplastics, enzymes, those sorts of things. And some are doing producing these innovations in food and agriculture. And the food and agriculture section is where I work, both plant biotechnology and animal biotechnology. So we get to see those folks that are helping to feed the world. Many of you have seen this quote, but I wanted to bring it again in front of you. The FAO, in fact, in 2007, did a study and looked at the next 50 years and how much food we'd have to produce. And we need to produce as much food as produced in the last 10,000 years. Now, this is a fact I think that really hits home when we talk about it with people, when we talk to Congress or we talk to politicians and such. It doesn't really strike them that food is a problem or how we're going to have abundance of food. But then you start to say, well, we need to produce a lot of food and we need to do it in an environmental sustainable way. I stole a couple of graphs from Elanco Animal Health, one of the members of BIO, but I think they help illustrate the point that even the United Nations and FAO made, that 70% of the world's additional food can be produced only with new and existing technologies. So you see, by 2050, we need to produce 100% more food, but 70% of that can come from technology. And so there are opportunities there. And in a recent report, the Enough report that Elanco put out, they talk about the growing middle class, and they talk about the increase in animal protein needs being even faster than the increase in overall food production needs. So you can see that in the next several years, it's going to be about 60% more meat, milk, and eggs that we need. Unfortunately, right now, by that point, we'd be utilizing more resources than the world makes back up in a year. It takes a year and a half if we don't have any technology to make those back, and so it is important to have technology there. When I look at animal biotechnology, I refer sometimes to what has happened in the plant biotechnology world, and a lot of these genetically engineered organisms have been out in the plant biotech world since 1996. You can see over time what technology has done just to corn yields, in fact. For a number of years, farmers utilized open pollination, and yields were pretty steady. But then we start to see things like fungicides, insecticides, nitrogen fertilizers, and such. And the slope starts going up. It goes up even faster as technology plays more part of it. And then biotech crops come along, 1996, and the slope is coming up even faster. So there is really an impact of technology. It's not something that's theoretical in the plant world. It's something that's actually happening. And you can see how farmers have adopted it. They've taken advantage of these new traits since '96 and really had a lot of success as they did their different crops. Things such as soybeans that are tolerant to herbicides, cotton that's tolerant to herbicides or resistant to insects, and then corn that also has things like BT corn and herbicide-tolerant corn. I think Ron touched on this a little bit, the coordinated framework. And so, as we think about plant and animal biotechnology, there's some slight difference in the regulation there, and I don't know if that's why the products are on different timelines in terms of when they come out, but I think it plays a part. In the coordinated framework, as Ron mentioned, coming out in 1986, it's really the federal safety net for assessing biotechnology. All products are subject to a science-based regulation with the caveat that there will be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, really the product-based statutes. And this is how it's supposed to work, at least. Individual products or categories can be eligible for exemption, and they're supposed to be as we get more experience and we get more data on these products, that at some point we know enough that we don't have to do as in-depth of regulation again. I don't think we've seen that. I think we've seen increased amounts of regulation as we've known more and more, which is difficult for someone such as myself to understand, but I think that's what we've seen. And I think we've also seen the precautionary approach applied under that for health, safety, environmental statutes. Precautionary principle, I think is something that's specifically defined, but I think precautionary approach certainly plays a part of that, and taking that to the extreme has caused an increase in the time that it's taken to see some of these products come to market. So it's not only the animal side that is also seeing a lot of regulatory delay, the plant side is as well. In the coordinated framework, really there are three main agencies that look at biotechnology depending on what applications you have. There's the USDA looking at the plants and the seeds, some of the animal biologics, and as well as the meat and poultry products, and the shipping of products from place to place under either plant or animal protection acts. There's the FDA looking at the food and the feed, the human biologics, the drugs, the genetically engineered animals, as well as medical devices, and they're really tasked with looking at the public health under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And then there's the EPA, and the EPA comes into mostly the plant biotechnology, but it talks about plant pesticides, or PIPs, plant-incorporated pesticides, herbicides that are applied to these, and the chemicals and microbials. Ron talked about NIPA, and NIPA plays into the environmental evaluation both at the USDA and at the FDA, and it's certainly the place that litigation has found its home. Specifically to animal biotechnology, there is Guidance 187 that is the guidance for industry in terms of how the FDA wanted to regulate animal biotechnology, and bio is a part of the process in terms of talking about that, putting that together, and giving comments back on that. You know, we do support the science-based regulatory process as laid out by the guidance. We don't support the political interference in the process that has been layered on top of those, and really has hurt the public health, we think, more than helped it. And you know, we feel that the process should allow innovative products to come to market after the science-based review, but allow that market to then decide what people are going to buy or whether there's acceptance of the technology. We've had some interesting questions, interesting interactions over the years with some of the agencies where they talk about, well, how are we going to market this, or how are we going to sell this to the public? And it shocks us because, you know, we see the agencies as doing the review, the risk assessment, and we don't really feel that it's their place to necessarily have to market the technologies as well. And so I think that's where some of the confusion has come into the process. Let's specifically talk about some of the animal biotechnology applications now and some of the potential that is out there. And you know, we'd love to see those things come to market if we can get a system that works and it's not stifled by inaction. Within animal biotechnology, we tend to paint it with a fairly broad brush. We talk about things such as genomics, cloning, genetic engineering, and even vaccines. I won't dwell too much on vaccines today, but you know, some of the questions we get is, well, you know, how do vaccines play into how food is produced? Should recombinant vaccines have to require a label of some sort in the food that's produced in it? So it's certainly a part of the question. Within genomics, we know that it can be utilized to improve livestock breeds. You can make faster breeding decisions. We can do animal identification or quality or trait certification with those. And there's lots of tools that are out there, and I won't go too much into those today because I think many of you already know them. On the cloning side, in 2008, the cloning risk assessment was issued by the FDA in saying that the food from clones is safe as that from non-clones, and we haven't heard that much about it since. The technology has been utilized and is being utilized. I think in one of your sessions you heard some about that. But in the U.S., I think it's just become a part of some production practices for those really high on genetics. In addition to the USDA, the European Food Safety Agency, the EFSA, also had a risk assessment on food from clones. They issued that in 2008. They were asked to go back and look at it and see if there were any changes, and they issued the same response in 2009. And they were asked to go look at it again, and they issued the same response in 2010, and somehow they skipped 2011. But then in 2012, they were asked again, and it came back and came up with the same answer, that the food from clones is safe as that from non-clones. So you can see there is some interest in Europe. Other countries that have issued risk assessments include Japan, New Zealand, Argentina, and China. Like I said, it's being utilized in a number of species to develop non-genetically engineered animals, but it's also a tool that's utilized in genetic engineering of animals, and that's a really powerful tool for those that are trying to make those. Bio has pushed the U.S. government as part of the cloning, about thinking about cloning and being a part of a like-minded consortium. Essentially, this like-minded consortium are other countries that want to utilize cloning as well. And you can see the countries listed there, but there was a statement that those countries came out with and signed together, saying that they didn't want cloning to be utilized to restrict trade or otherwise impinge on the technology. I think that's really important because as we look at the need to talk about these technologies, it's easy for them to be utilized worldwide, such as cloning, and other countries do want to utilize them. And so if we can come together and have these consortiums and these agreements, it does help worldwide as we think about utilizing some of these technologies, and especially when we talk to folks that aren't as interested in utilizing them or restricting trade because of them. A couple of pictures here. You know, you're always supposed to include pictures of children or pets or babies or something in your presentation to make sure everybody's still staying awake, and I think everybody's done a good job, so I won't dwell too long on them. But cloning has been utilized for the genetically elite animals. You can see both in cattle, there are also cloned pigs, cloned horses, and some cloned sheep and goats. And so it is something that is being utilized. Like I said, in the U.S. we haven't talked a lot about cloning in the past 5-6 years, but in the EU they continue to talk about cloning. They have a novel foods regulation that was on the books and talked about a couple years ago, and there was about a 3-year conversation on that. At the end of the 3 years, they didn't come to a decision, and so they had to kind of start over on novel foods. And one of the parts of the novel foods regulation was really on how clones would be dealt with, or the offspring of clones, or their meat or milk. Throughout this process in the last couple of years, the EU has put together an impact statement on clones and the economic impact and what people think about them. And so the EU Commission has come back with that impact statement and made a new proposal here recently. Essentially, the proposal would ban cloning for food production in the EU for the next 5 years. It would label food from clones. They would require further analysis of labeling beef from cloned offspring as part of this proposal. It would not restrict embryos or semen from clones, which I think was something that the U.S. industry saw as a good point, in that, you know, we produce some clones here and embryos and semen come from those, and that way they wouldn't be restricted going to Europe, and those farmers could still have those technologies. Unfortunately, the EU Commission isn't the final word on this, and so the EU Parliament also has its ideas on it, and they'll be a part of the discussion going forward. The Parliament is much more on the side of restricting cloning, in that they want a full ban on clones and their offspring, and ban imported clones and offspring, or at least label them, they say. And so I think the conversation will restart, and I'm not sure where it will end up on this time. I don't see it end up in a much different place where there was really still a separation when they got to the end of the discussion. But this is an example of the precautionary principle at play. You know, the EU wants to ban cloning so that the stated goal is so that the process can improve in the 5 years when it's being banned. It seems a bit counterintuitive to me to ban a process for 5 years hoping that it improves in the meantime, but maybe that's just me. I mentioned earlier that EFSA has looked at the food safety from clones several times, but yet it doesn't seem to be making an impact on those legislators in the EU Parliament, who some have issues with ethics or welfare of cloning, and they're trying to utilize safety or animal health as surrogates for those issues that they really have problems with. I'm going to move on to some other animal biotechnology applications, and I'll refer to my second point here first, so in case you need to write down that address really quick. The Bio put together a report on genetically engineered animals and public health, and we brought out an update to that here a year or so ago, a couple years ago now, and it's available at that website. If you go to that website, you can find it with a link within the page. But there are real opportunities for animal biotechnology to impact the food availability, the costs and the production practices that we have. We think about this not only in the sense of food, but we also think about it in the sense of biomedical. And, you know, as we raise animals and we have the opportunities to impact people from a food security side, we also have opportunities to impact people on the public health side, the human health side. And some of these animals we know go into things such as biomedical research treatments or the production of pharmaceuticals even. Right now, the one genetically engineered animal that has been approved as making a human pharmaceutical in its milk. You may have seen this picture about 40 minutes ago or so, but I wanted to bring it up again because Ron's company, AquaBounty, has the Aqua Advantage salmon, and not only does it grow faster and gives the real opportunity for a local-based economy where you're raising salmon locally and you can lower some of the travel distance and stuff, but we've put together a quick kind of back of the napkin calculation to say, right now, with all the Atlantic salmon that's imported, about around 94-95% of that consumed in the U.S., the environmental impact is if you would load the 747s, which is how it's shipped from Chile and Scotland and Norway, that would be about 1,847 fully loaded 747s, as full as you could get them. Well, that equates to about 95,000 cars per year worth of fuel that it takes to import all that salmon. And so you think about that impact that just a simple technology, a simple gene could make, and there's real promise for the technology. I've been to some of the other sessions that you've held this week, and I think some of the diseases there talked about, you know, are they're really unfortunate. But I think there's also some opportunities that animal biotechnology could help out with some of these things. Obviously, the idea of a BSE resistant cow would be really palatable to a lot of people. I know we have BSE under pretty good control in this country, but I want to let you know that the picture of these cattle, they don't make the prion, but they can remain healthy. I think a lot of you remember back to 2004 when we had some huge losses to the U.S. beef industry because of the BSE case that came about. And so these cattle are available. I think right now they're mainly targeted towards producing prion and antibody-free bovine sera and reagents for cell culture, so that you don't have to worry about those sorts of things there. But there are opportunities for some of these disease challenges that are there. One of the disease challenges we still struggle with is mastitis. And USDA has produced a project where they had a cow that was resistant to mastitis. And with mastitis costs being upwards of $2 billion a year, that's a pretty significant chunk of change. There's this opportunity that some of these animals could be utilized that wouldn't require the antibiotics needed for mastitis, and we've had symposia on antibiotics here too, and know what the impact of antibiotics is and what the need for antibiotics is and what the commotion and talk about antibiotics is. Unfortunately, that project was there before the regulatory system was really mature, and it was something that they weren't able to bring through to the regulatory project. And so those animals are in the freezer right now, and it's a technology that isn't currently being utilized. Another technology that sounds like a great idea, I think, was the EnviroPig. Essentially, the pig makes phytase in its saliva so that it can break down and better utilize the phosphorus in its diet. We don't have as much phosphorus coming out the back end, and you don't end up with some of the environmental challenges. Again, this was at the University of Guelph, and they were developing this, and they were going through the process, and the inaction that was seen in the regulatory process caused this pig also to make its way into the freezer. I think it's unfortunate because if it takes costs, such as Ron outlined, $70 million or $80 million to get an animal through, it's going to be really difficult for places like universities and other small research companies to get their way through the regulatory system. And a lot of the times it was because of inaction on the regulator's part. There really wasn't that knowledge that things were going forward, and so it was hard to know that you'd have somewhere to go with it, so those projects become discontinued. In animal agriculture, we're starting to utilize some newer technologies. I think Mark Walton talked a little bit about this, and you've heard about this in some of the other sessions or conversations. But these newer technologies change the discussion a little bit, and it changes it with the regulators. They have questions of how they're going to regulate or if they're going to regulate, and sometimes these technologies really are an advanced form of breeding. And so it's something that if you strictly looked at the product that was produced, there really isn't a call for regulation of these, but nonetheless people want to take a look at these and figure that out from the regulatory system. Gene editing is one of the newer technologies where you can make single changes to DNA. For example, take horned cattle and make them hold. Other different genes that you can work with there on a very precise basis, and something that is a lot more precise than just breeding two animals together. RNA interference, or RNAi, is also another newer technology that you already take small segments of RNA and it keeps certain genes from being expressed. This can be utilized in a variety of organisms, but obviously it can be utilized in animals, and I'll have a couple examples of how it might be utilized here in a bit. It won the 2006 Nobel Prize, and so it's not really something that's all that old in terms of researching, but it's something that's quite powerful. For example, how can RNAi be used to produce disease-resistant livestock? In China, the H7N9 outbreak cost $6.5 billion. There are influenza chickens that could be resistant to influenza through RNAi that could have helped with that. In 2001, the FMD outbreak in Britain cost $13 billion. It can be FMD-resistant cattle through RNAi that can help out with that. We've had 59 million human cases of H1N1 in 2009, and a lot of public publicity and media about that, as you all know. But RNAi can help with pigs that maybe aren't reservoirs of influenza for certain strains. And in the aquaculture world, the ISA can be found in salmon worldwide and really has decimated the Chilean industry for several years. And you can create disease-resistant fish through RNAi. So there are some really powerful tools that are out there that we have a lot of figuring out on how they're going to be regulated, if they're going to be regulated, and so I think there'll be lots of conversations on that in the near future. Besides animals for food production, there's a few other things that I wanted to mention here, and looking at other ways that we have utilized animals over the years. We've obviously utilized them for their meat, milk, and eggs, but we've utilized them for fiber, thinking of wool. We've utilized them for transportation. We've utilized them for cultivation and things like that. And so there are other uses that we have in animal agriculture and ways that we can use animals. This picture is a picture of goats that actually produce spider silk in their milk that can be used for a lot of different applications, whether they're medical applications or whether they're in certain manufacturing. We know spider silk is a really strong fiber, but farming spiders is also a very difficult task, not only because they're fast, but because they tend to eat each other at times. And so that doesn't lead to so many opportunities, but the goat opportunity would be there. We also have genetically engineered livestock that are models of human disease, so that companies that are researching cures and treatments for these different diseases could find those cures and treatments maybe faster or in a way that is more applicable to humans. The list of current models is up here, and that really grows every day. I think it's interesting to look at the genetically engineered livestock models of human disease, because it's not only something that's happening in the U.S., but it's also happening in Europe. It's also happening worldwide. And so even though the Europeans have some reticence in terms of utilizing technology for food production, they certainly want to utilize the technology. And so some of these applications may be things that we see worldwide, really. In addition, another interesting application of animals to human health are these cattle that carry human antibody genes. So essentially you could immunize these cattle, provide an antigen to them, and they would create human antibodies so that we could treat people much faster if they got things such as an anthrax or botulism introgression into them. Animals also give us the opportunity to do cost savings when we're thinking about bringing forth antibodies or other methods of production. You can build a new laboratory for $600 million to produce antibodies, or you can build a goat shed for $3 million to operate it and produce really the same protein. And that protein produced at either of the facilities can be done in the same amounts, because animals really are good producers of proteins, and so there are opportunities to utilize them in those ways. Unfortunately, we see a lot of these technologies really at a crossroads. Animal biotechnologies are generally small companies. They're not big. They're very passionate. They're very interested in bringing these technologies to bear, but they tend to be small. And we also see the no predictability in the regulatory system, and that has led to a lot of the inactions there. We have questions from the public, we have questions about trade, and we have very well-funded opponents of the technology. Ron mentioned this quickly, but these are some of the examples of some of the technology opponents pieces that are out there. You can see people like the Center for Food Safety or Greenpeace or the Non-GMO Project all have interesting graphics and articles that are out there. A couple perspectives from that industry I wanted to bring forward, and some of these you may have seen, some of these you may have not, but essentially we've seen a lot of ballot initiatives and we've seen a lot of legislative intros into trying to get genetically engineered foods labeled. A lot of times proponents will say this is a people's right to know, or this is so people know what's in their food, but I think their statements kind of speak for themselves in terms of what the true goals and thoughts are of people like the Center for Food Safety or the Organic Consumers Association, or even Dr. Mercola, who has his own website and sells a lot of foods that might compete on the market. Their intention to oppose biotechnology is really to make these marketing decisions for people through legislation. They're trying to eliminate or prejudice biotech food. They're trying to really undermine consumer confidence. And I think it's, as I speak to people, it's not just really in food that's made with biotechnology, but they're undermining the confidence in food in general. And I think that's really a disservice to the whole food industry. They're certainly trying to undermine the value chain confidence and demand for genetically engineered ingredients, and that's so that they can increase their market share of the different products that they're trying to sell. One of BIO's challenges is that we're really the advocate for biotechnology, and so not only do we advocate at the federal level, but we also advocate in the states. And across the United States, we've seen quite a few ballot initiatives and legislative proposals on labeling food, and in 2014, I don't think that will change. We'll see somewhere on the order of 30 states that will have some impacts of either bills introduced or ballot initiatives trying to get signatures for. And so that challenge continues to be out there as we do that. It's really unfortunate because these things have really stalled innovation in a number of areas where we can be feeding people. In animal agriculture, in the recent Enough report by Elanco Animal Health, they do a nice job of elucidating some of this in that for decades production of shell eggs has increased on the order of 1 3/4 eggs per year. But since the late 1990s, that production trend is actually reversed due to things such as disease, changing practices, and removing the innovations that might have otherwise continued us in the direction of being more productive. Ron went through a lot of the regulatory inaction that he's seen on the Aqua Advantage salmon, and so I won't go through all of that, but I will mention that when I started at Bio in 2010, we had the VMAC there later that year, and I know some of you had participated on the Veterinary Medical Advisory Committee, and the conclusions that came out of the FDA at that meeting were that the salmon is as safe as a conventional salmon. And here we are almost 1,300 days later since that VMAC meeting, and we really haven't had a decision made on that. That's an awfully long time for inaction to keep stifling innovation. You probably heard earlier in the meeting that some of this inaction is causing these technologies to move overseas. And so a few facts here that China has invested over $12 billion in agricultural biotechnology, and they've developed over 50 different animal lines. Both animals that we've seen here and developed, but some of the animals that they have developed on their own. Earlier I showed a slide of the Mastitis resistant cow. Recently I learned that the Chinese have put that same gene into Holsteins and have over 100 Holsteins that are milking that are resistant to mastitis through that technology. So that pipeline in China is certainly there. The funding for developing these innovations is certainly there, and they continue to ask these innovations to move overseas. Brazil, another developing country, is also recruiting U.S. researchers and have a supportive environment for biotechnology. On the plant biotechnology side, in fact, the Brazilian authorities are getting products out faster than the U.S. now. So Brazilian farmers have these technologies that they can utilize that U.S. farmers cannot at this time. And that's a real paradigm change, because for a long time the U.S. was the gold standard of regulation and getting things out. In the EU, as I mentioned, the biomedical research is continuing in livestock, and they've put together a regulatory regime for GE animals. I don't think there's any people that have applied there yet, but other countries certainly are putting those together, and we see that worldwide with other regulatory regimes coming online. So what are we doing about that? What are we doing about the opponents that want to keep technology out? Well, first, we're trying an initiative called GMO Answers, and GMO Answers is a product of the Council for Biotechnology Information, which is a sister organization of BIO. Essentially, it's the 6 large plant biotechnology companies. But in that, we know that we have good stories that are not being heard because we're not believed. We're the biotechnology industry, the boogeyman in some people's closets. And instead of repeating the messages that we've been repeating over and over and what the science says and what it does, we really have tried to do something a little bit different. We've tried to be committed to show the audience is that we have nothing to hide. We're trying to be transparent, and we've come to the realization that only when our audiences understand we are listening to them will they begin to listen to us. And so we're doing a lot of listening, and we're doing a lot of conversations. Kind of at the forefront of this is the flagship part of GMO Answers, and that's the website, www.gmoanswers.com. And in that website, there's the opportunity for people to read articles and learn about biotechnology. But the main part of it is to ask questions. Essentially, we have a portal there where consumers can ask any question they want on biotechnology. And we have tried to pull together answers for all of those different questions. The group that we have pulled together to answer those questions includes members of companies when questions go specifically to companies. They include third-party independent experts when it's a question that can be answered by them. And they go to farmers and consumers and dietitians and those folks when that's the expertise that is needed. And so far we've had 660 questions that have been submitted to GMO Answers. And that's quite a few for something that's less than a year old. We tried to answer all of them. So far we've gotten 447 of them answered, and we've got several that are in progress or are going. We're trying to engage on places like Facebook and Twitter and those places where people tend to look for information sometimes nowadays. But we've had pretty good success in terms of people staying on the website and finding information there. The average duration of the visit to GMO Answers is somewhere around 5 minutes, which is really an eternity in the social media networking time realm. And we've had 35% of the visitors return to find more information. Now I have a couple of flyers and postcards on GMO Answers if people want those afterwards that they can give you. But in that we have some of our most common some of our most common questions, some of the background and principles, and some of the information that we're trying to get out to people. And we see that people are engaging there, and we're really excited about the conversations that people are having. We're really excited that the media is noticing as well. We're seeing coverage in different places that we wouldn't have seen before. We're seeing the opportunities to converse with folks at a lot of different media organizations when they might not have come and asked us before. And so that interaction has been really a valuable tool for us to get messages out and to talk about why we believe so much in biotechnology. In conclusion, innovations from biotechnology, I fervently believe, will positively impact the future of food production. We're seeking to work in partnership with the entire value chain and have conversations with retailers, with processors, with producers, and with folks that are interested in utilizing the technologies, because we want to get more information out there, and we need people in the value chain to get more information out there so we can work for public understanding as well as confidence in the technologies. Unfortunately, we have inaction that is causing some of these innovations to really to wither and to have difficult times or to spend a lot of money just waiting for decisions being made. And I think some of that comes from an overabundance of precaution. And so part of it is us getting people comfortable with the technologies and comfortable with what we're utilizing. I'm from Central Iowa, and so we're kind of proud of the recent statue that went up in the U.S. Capitol of Norman Borlaug. And so I wanted to leave you with this quote, that not one person has suffered negative effects from innovations like GMO, yet 25,000 people die every day from malnutrition. Dr. Borlaug said this, and I think it still rings true here 5 years later and really is important to think about. And limiting innovation due to imagined possibilities in the precautionary principle has negative ramifications for us all, both today as well as in the future. If people want to have further conversations, I'm here my email and phone and our address for our website. And so we invite those. We want to have conversations. We want to talk about the technology. We also want you to talk about the technology, and we want you to be informed about it. I'll put a quick plug in for our Livestock Biotech Summit that happens in September in Sioux Falls, and that's the website where you can find some more information about that. And we'll further those conversations. I really thank you for the opportunity to come and talk about this today and be in front of you, and look forward to any further conversations we might have. Thank you.